coming in and having to follow Kate, who is talking not only about such important issues that we'll both talk about around standards and around materials, but so much around instructional practice and the real work teachers are doing with kids. And so much of what we're doing is that first charge, right? All 5 of those charges Kate talked about are necessary. And we're just going to hone in on number 1. So I do appreciate that Kate kind of laid the groundwork by saying, this is kind of technical and a little boring. As you can imagine, sitting there, and this is what we do with teachers. We have teachers, and I'll share so much more about our process, who are never have, and likely never going to teach these books and materials, spend hundreds of hours touching every page, looking at standards alignment, as opposed to the critical work they're doing full time every day, trying to honor Kate's charge for all of you and for all of our educators. So what I hope to do they broke me up for lunch, which is fantastic. So I do this is kind of like the Avengers or something that, you've already signed up for a sequel. So no matter how well part 1 does, I feel great that I'm under contract for part 2 post-lunch to keep talking. So our first piece that we're gonna do today is really understand the importance of instructional materials. I feel like I have had all thunder stolen between Sheila's great research that's Wisconsin specific, as well as some of the studies Kate has talked about. And I'm gonna reiterate some and maybe bring a slightly different lens to it. The second thing we'll do is really talk about selecting materials and the what you choose matters. So we're gonna dig really deep into that first charge. We're going to really spend a lot of time talking about what we're seeing in the instructional materials marketplace. And as Sheila said, a big part of this story is that the materials are getting better and better. And while there may not have been options when the standards passed, we are finding more and more aligned options now. So I can't wait to talk to you a little bit about what we're finding. Then we're going to do lunch, and after lunch, we'll talk about how you choose materials matter. Because ultimately, if you do not engage teachers, engage your community, and you're not thoughtful on what you are adapting, how you're talking about teachers, about their own teacher-created lessons and the like, whatever you purchase ultimately may end up in shrink wrap and never get utilized in the classroom. Okay? So a little bit about me. I didn't really realize it, but I was always a critic of instructional materials. So look at that handsome man with really poofy hair and no gray. This was a absolutely way too self-confident and non-reflective salutatorian who at his graduation decided to talk about how little critical thinking I had gotten, both from my teachers and in the instructional material, thereby demonstrating my great level of critical thinking in some ways, right? But it's that last sentence that I didn't even know it at age 18, that I would be destined to keep complaining about the quality of textbooks and instructional materials. Now, we did not have adaptive digital products at this point, although I was in the computer club, and we did have one computer in the whole school with some knobs and dials. I don't even think it was an Apple IIc at that point, and it was like TRS-80s. But still looking at that. So I got to Ed Reports. We're only 4.5 years old. We're still babies in the realm of nonprofit organizations. And I didn't really realize that rating instructional material charged for a while in my own career. So my background is not as grounded in instruction as Kate's. So my background is somebody who got certified to teach and ran for the hills because it was the toughest thing I ever did. Oh my gosh. The only thing I can think that may be tougher than teaching is trying to be an administrator and actually trying to herd and corral teachers. So I decided I'm better off with adults. But since I still missed working with high school level children, I decided to go into political science and ultimately end up working with state legislators. It seemed like this really nice mix of kind of the adolescence into adulthood. So I started working in policy at the National Conference of State Legislatures and really worked, if you look at this diagram up there, at those outside circles in the bullseye. They're super important around education policy, education funding. So I focused a lot in that job on who was teaching. Then I started working at the New Teacher Center, where I spent a lot of time in charge of their research and communication, but mostly doing surveys on teaching and learning conditions. So I actually gathered more than 1.5 million teacher voices, because that's what I do. I'm too scared to teach. I listen to those who know what they're doing, those in the classroom, and thought a lot about school conditions. Are the right environments there that can empower teachers to do their best work? So again, a lot on the who and a lot on the where, but I wasn't really in that mid bullseye. So when the opportunity at Ed Reports came around, I really realized I don't know anything about the what. And the what's being taught is usually the critical lever in all of those policy conversations I was a part of. All of those school culture conversations I was a part of was being almost completely ignored. So again, if you just think about the instructional core, it really ultimately comes down to a teacher, a student, and that content. And how that content is presented, arrayed, organized, scoped, and sequenced, both for that adult and for that student, can have a tremendous impact on student learning. So Kate buzzed by many of these reports. The handout or the link that Sheila had has some of these studies on it. But I just wanted to take a second to actually walk through a few of them. And I also want to say how hard it is to gather efficacy data on instructional materials for individual materials. So I probably get asked this question more than any other question, which is, why are you looking at the what's in the book? Why don't you just look at whether or not kids do better who use those books? And the answer is because it takes years, it's super hard, and of course the curriculum effects are super important, as Kate alluded to, and as some of these studies show, but it's not just the materials itself, it's how the materials are actually implemented and the ongoing professional learning and support that teachers receive in utilizing those instructional materials that make a difference. So to get enough data to move the needle enough on any single curriculum is really hard. It's why, as you're thinking about ESSA and evidence for ESSA, it's really hard to pull on full scoped and sequenced core materials as opposed to some of the supplementals that you may be using in a tiered system of support, etc. But when you look at materials across the board, you can see some gains. So this first study from a couple years ago looked at 5 math curricula in grades 4 and 5 in particular. They found 3 moved the needle a little bit, but not significantly one way or the other. 1, actually the kids did worse by far in this classroom that was in use, and 1 in which the kids did better. And the cumulative difference of switching from that lower textbook to the higher textbook in terms of those efficacy was the equivalent, Kate talked about it in terms of teachers from the 70th to 50th percentile. But since I used to work at the New Teacher Center, I like to talk about it in years of teaching. So that impact is the difference between giving a classroom to a first-year teacher and on day 1 of a 4th-year teacher. Think for all of you out there to your first day in the classroom and how awesomely prepared you probably felt, almost as prepared as I feel literally staring into this computer monitor talking to all of you, right? Versus your 4th year when you're in a rhythm. You've adapted, you've adjusted, you've learned some things, you're still petrified and you're still learning things, right? A huge difference. And when we think about the difference those materials can have, it's when you think of it from that policy perspective and an investment perspective, bad materials and good materials cost the same. There is no difference. They don't charge you double to say, this is a way better book. We're going to charge you twice as much. Or, you know, it's not really standards aligned, 50% off on sale this year. The cost of textbooks are the same regardless of their alignment with standards. And so given that, when you look at the cost effectiveness of certain reforms, as you're thinking about limited budgets, switching instructional materials to more aligned materials can have a huge impact relative to other more expensive reforms. Not only is it important, it's something that teachers crave. And so the 47% of teachers from Wisconsin who said, I want aligned, better materials, this is true nationally as well. So when you look at teachers' top priorities, you can see here, we all would like to have more teachers in our building, so we have less students in front of us. But equal to that is, I need high quality instructional materials. I need that path and that nature guide and not the machete, right? You can see technology, higher salaries go even lower. But what we find is only 18% of teachers strongly agree that the materials they have in front of them are aligned to standards. So what does that mean? And Kate's got a lot of this. It means you're spending a lot of time curating or creating. So teachers, on average, again, this is some national data from only a couple years ago, spend about 7 hours just out there on a quest looking for instructional materials that could be aligned to standards. 7 hours. And the challenge is where they're going to look. We already talked about the 3, but I put some percentages so you can actually see the order. They, in fact, go to Google first. The place teachers go most is Google searching a standard or a lesson on something on a site that isn't curated. It's just lesson after lesson based on algorithms that are not about the quality of the lesson. 85% go to Pinterest, 79% go to Teachers Pay Teachers, and a significantly smaller proportion goes to a place with open education resources, and we're going to talk post-lunch where you can go to find more free lessons and different guides to help adapt materials, because we understand you all may not be in a position to go and select instructional materials right away. Okay? But far less are going to a place where these materials have been scoped and sequenced, and you have an idea about how they fit into the larger realm. In addition to those 7 hours looking and hunting, 5 hours creating their own. As Kate mentioned in the opportunity myth in TNTP, we find when teachers do this, they're not doing as good a job as they think. You may be doing a great job, but we're talking about millions of teachers, classroom by classroom, reinventing the wheel. And this is really, really hard to do. I heard one policymaker frame it, we were asking teachers to be master chefs from day one. And that is a hard job. We want everyone to be a Beard Award winner in terms of what they're preparing. But now we're not asking them to just be the chef. We're asking them to be the farmer and to then grow all of these crops, bring them in, and figure out how you're going to prepare them. It's virtually impossible. Some of the most talented teachers can do it. It is heroic work. But I want to go back, again, having been at NTC and working with new teachers who are disproportionately in front of students of color and high poverty populations. And ultimately, the ability to do this varies, creating some of these equity issues, let alone the coherence issues that we've already discussed. So again, you can see here that ultimately more than, well, about half are saying most or virtually all of what they're putting in front of kids, they're creating on their own, okay? And when that happens, those assignments are less likely to be on grade level. They are less likely to engage in subject-specific practices, and they're less likely to really engage kids. Given that, here are some real numbers back, again, to that study about the amount of hours in a school year for which the assignment is not on grade level, not engaging, and that the teacher did not spend time with that student as the agent of their own learning. And you can see 581 hours over the course of the year across all these subject areas. So we've asked teachers to do something that is virtually impossible. And in the end, we're struggling to do it well. But what we do know is if, again, we provide that trail map, if we ultimately help teachers not just figure out what they're cooking for dinner that day, but course out the entire year of meals so we know every kid is going to get a well-balanced, healthy meal across a year, that ultimately we see that teaching practice changes. So this comes from a study by Rand that just came out this year. The blue bar are teachers using instructional materials that were aligned, and they used Ed Reports as a proxy for that. And the orange bar are the percentage of teachers who aren't using any aligned materials. And what you see down the left, if you have really good eyesight in this room, or hopefully you're sitting closer to the screen in your room, is the mathematical practices along the left. Ultimately, with aligned texts that focus on the depth of the standard and fully call out the instructional shifts as well, that we see teachers are more likely to use precise mathematical language. They are far more likely to challenge students to explain and justify work. They're more likely to work with kids to critique the reasoning of others and their own, and certainly constructing viable arguments. Okay? If you give them the material that helps them understand and think these things through, it ultimately will show in their practice as well. And one last slide on the impact, again, of not doing this and really hitting some of the remedial pieces if we are off grade level. Ultimately, 40% of kids take at least one remedial class in college because we are not giving them grade level work. That is $1.5 billion spent annually on remedial courses. 1 in 4 students are spending an average of $3,000 more out of their own pocket, or as you can see on the left, out of the bank's pocket that they have to repay over and over again. And yet, if you take those remedial classes, you are much more likely to drop out. So there is a huge cost to this as well. Financial, on top of all the other costs that we've been discussing all morning. So let me tell you about Ed Reports. We started this journey around 2014 trying to solve a really simple problem that Sheila actually hit right in the beginning. Literally 1 week after Common Core standards were passed in a variety of states, there was, actually these are real stickers, right, from the clip art on their website. Within 1 week, materials were saying they were standards aligned. Now, if you say, I can find a reference to a standard in a lesson, or I could say this lesson maybe helps a kid learn how to divide fractions, check. But to really honor the full intent and depth of the standards and the instructional shifts that these materials need to help teachers make, to help kids really become college and career ready in a week. So a group of folks got together and said, wow, common standards, the advent of technology, there's going to be more and more material. How do we know if these stickers are right? And these materials are not really easy to get for an average teacher. So how are we going to be able to really look and check that out? So Ed Reports came into existence as a by educator, for educator group to assess the quality of instructional material with a real emphasis on when we identify excellence, we do so by saying we start with the standards. And I'll talk more about that in a second. If we can help identify which materials are truly aligned to those standards and give a wealth of evidence to teachers who may be utilizing those materials, let alone selecting them, that ultimately we are going to get better materials in teachers' hands because they're going to be clamoring and asking for them. If we do that, materials will improve and ultimately things will be better for kids. All of our efforts by educators to create these tools, and they are created by educators after extensive listening tour, research, and the like, are all there to provide evidence to empower local districts and schools to make smart selection decisions for them. Ed Reports does not recommend any instructional materials. I don't know your kids, I don't know your budget, but what we do know is if we have high quality indicators that we can calibrate on and provide evidence, that with that evidence you locally can make really smart decisions about getting standards aligned materials in the hands of teachers to do their work. So we do that by finding great educators who I think are just, I'm in awe, because again, these are educators who after teaching all day, and you know the same educators who review for us are on every one of your district committees, and they are doing everything in their school, and they're already the content chair and doing these different things. They go home and they spend between 5 to 10 hours per week touching every single page of the teacher edition, the student edition, clicking every single link across all of the core instructional materials. We've trained more than 300 educators from 46 states, and in fact, we had a huge crew from Milwaukee as some of our inaugural reviewers because they really knew the math standards really well. And that's what we go and look for. Do you know the standards? And not just can you see them in your own instructional practice, but can you see them in materials that you may never teach? We do a lot of training to make sure they understand our tool. And then after about 3 days of face-to-face, we send them off. Again, they spend 5 to 10 hours per week going through these indicator by indicator, documenting evidence for you to make great decisions. They get together weekly. They look at this evidence and they follow our evidence guides, all of which we try to be transparent, are on our website. It gives them guidance only, not only what to look for, but what to discuss together as a collaborative team. Our reviews are not based on what an educator thinks. It's on teams of educators, and we work really hard to ensure they bring a diversity of geography, of perspective, and the host as they come into the reviews. They talk every week. They go through that evidence. They go through the questions. They look at the scoring guidance, and ultimately they give a score on each of the indicators in the tool I'll talk to you about. Okay? This process, given the extent of it, takes 4 to 6 months. This is why we hope you can use this evidence. For you to do that locally is really, really hard, even if you have these great educators who know the standards really well. And depending on the number of materials you'd want to review, you don't normally have 4 to 6 months to spend 10 hours per week going page by page, which is why we're here to do that and share that evidence to inform your thinking, okay? That takes roughly 4 to 6 months Then we spend time calibrating across teams. You can imagine we do a lot of work with a K2 team and a 3-5 team for an elementary curriculum. And by the way, we break those up because the teachers of K2 may not be in the same headspace and able to see some of those things in 3-5, right? And the like. Ultimately, we then send our review to publishers. We try to work collaboratively with publishers. We try to purchase our materials from them, okay? We are 100% philanthropically funded. We buy everything we review. We ask them to orient our reviewers because they'll do a better job if they understand the fundamental design of those materials. Then we give the publishers an embargoed report. We give them the opportunity to submit counter evidence around factual errors and omission if we didn't see something, because our educators are human and work full-time every day with kids. And so ultimately, we then go back, see if we need to make any change, and we let publishers put a response up. I hope as you're looking at our tool and our evidence, you do look at those publisher responses. And we know at Ed Reports, if you are looking at evidence from educators around whether some of these indicators are there around standards alignment, and you're looking at a publisher's response, you are likely having a much healthier conversation than you might have been reflecting on that second learning opportunity on page 6 of your learning guide, right? Okay. So our tools, we work with educators to create them based on research, based on tools that we can see in the field from the 19 states that have a state adoption process through tools like the IMET from Student Achievement Partners, the EQUIP rubric, which is designed for units and lessons from Achieve, and work together to put that into a tool that, again, we emphasize standards alignment, and that's why we have a gateway system. What our educators told us, if the right math is not present in the right doses at the right time, conversations about its rigor and its usability don't matter. It's off-grade level math. We want to stop the review. We want to really talk about those stickers in that first gateway. If it's not focused and it's not coherent, we're not going to move on, okay? So we have a gateway system. The first two collectively comprise alignment, and the third, we look at usability. Some of those indicators on usability get at the design for students. Is it distracting? Is everything there? The second one is around use and design. Are they educative? Do teachers actually learn and get some support and development through the materials in using them? The third area we look at on usability is the quality of the assessments. And are they getting at the full depth of the standards? The fourth is on differentiation. And the fifth is on technology, if appropriate. It's non-scored because we're looking at textbooks and some digital materials. In each of these, there is a lot of latitude to supplement some of your priorities as a district as you think about your own teaching core. You think about their preparedness to implement a curriculum, and I'm sure you can think about a lot of other aspects of usability that may be important to you. That is fantastic because these reviews are a place to start, not a place to end. Again, we are not telling you what to purchase. We are providing you with evidence in these key areas, but only these areas if you're fully aligned to standards to help you and your educators think through these choices. So far in our 4 years, again, I mentioned where our reviewers are. We've reviewed almost 500 grade or course level materials in math and ELA. Our middle school science reviews against next generation science standards are almost complete and will be published at the beginning of the year. We've also been piloting, looking at off-the-shelf fixed form interim assessments, because we've heard a lot from the field. If you're using an assessment that's not embedded in the curriculum and that assessment may not be aligned, that may ultimately have you supplement some of the best parts of a standard aligned set of materials. In the end, back to that theory of action, it works. 20 publishers have told us, and we've seen it because we've re-reviewed new editions, that their materials, that they've changed the materials as a result of the review. So ultimately, we are in a position where we are seeing more and more standards aligned material. And utilizing our reviews, I was presumptuous and put a picture of Wisconsin in the clip art because I knew we were going to have that much success today, that ultimately this is making a difference for kids. So I want to quickly talk about our criteria and ultimately what we see in the field before we wrap for lunch. Okay. So in math, we are focusing in Gateway 1 on focus and coherence. Okay. Ultimately, have we done what college and career standards ask us to do? Look at the research on learning progressions in math, and we're really not going a mile wide and an inch deep. We're going at full depth. So we look at, are you holding kids accountable for off grade level work that's far ahead? And we're looking if it's coherent within a grade and across grades, which is, again, really hard to do if you're building something lesson by lesson, particularly in math, as well as ELA. If it meets or partially meets our criteria for focus and coherence, because you may be able to adapt the materials if it partially meets our criteria to get some of those aspects of focus and coherence, we look at rigor. So we look at application, we look at fluency, and we look at conceptual understanding, and then we look at the connection between the standards and the mathematical practices. Only if materials pass Gateway 1 and 2, only if they're standards aligned, do we provide information on usability, because we know that has been how districts have decided forever around adoptions. So what we found in our math reports is about 20% of materials fully met our alignment criteria. Only 20%. That said, our inaugural reviews in 2015, when we looked at 19 instructional series, that would be only 1. At all grade levels, there are multiple materials that fully meet our alignment criteria. Several of these are open education resources and freely available, although of course, freely available, there is a lot you still need to think about around implementation and professional learning around these open education resources. What we tend to find is that materials are doing better and better taking the off-grade level work out. That said, kindergarten remains a pain point. Kindergarten still has a lot of first and second grade standards in them, and the transition years also seem to be a pain point. So for 6th grade, there's so much 5th grade material, in large, especially if you're buying a 6-8 or even a 6-12, where they're not sure and haven't designed the K-5 learning within it. So we see we're getting better on focus and coherence, but in our reports, pay close attention to kindergarten and 6th grade, okay? Where the materials could do better is really around conceptual understanding. And this almost, while we're talking math, it gets to exactly what Kate was talking about around ELA. Some of the scaffolds we see in these materials are so strong and rigid, it doesn't allow kids to get to the full depth of the standards to demonstrate the conceptual understanding aspects of rigor, because it's literally walking them through step by step which mathematical practice and tool to use. It doesn't allow them to model. It doesn't allow them to really construct their own arguments. It walks them through. In high school, we see the widely accepted prerequisites are really there. And similar in the high school progressions, are they really allowing kids the opportunity to model, to critique the reasoning of others, and to really demonstrate their full understanding of the standard? Okay. In English language arts, our first gateway, we focus on what kids are reading, the text quality and complexity. As you're thinking about ELA materials, and if you're thinking about culturally responsive things to read, we list pretty much all anchor texts of anything that has been reviewed in our first indicators. So again, as this evidence is there to empower you, you now know what kids are going to read by looking through those indicators as you start to win a choice that we'll talk about after lunch, okay? We're really looking at the tasks and the presence of all the standards, and are the questions really text dependent, or as Kate was showing, can you answer these questions without reading anything? Gateway 2, we look at building knowledge, okay? Do the materials fully build knowledge up throughout the grades, and really working on ultimately vocabulary, and then we get through usability. We have found more materials fully meet our ELA standards, but that is in large part because what we found, particularly with elementary ELA materials, is they meet the standards because they are massive. They have so much stuff to read. They have so many lessons. They have put so many things in at the requests of districts that it would be virtually impossible for a teacher to get through all of it. And one of the challenges of why they don't fully pass our second gateway on building knowledge is there are a ton of paths through these ELA materials where a child may come out without that vocabulary, without that opportunity to build knowledge, because there is not sufficient guidance for teachers to really pull all of these things together. So we have a warehouse at an undisclosed location. With some of these materials, literally the shelves broke finally under the weight, literally, of our last ELA material. There's just so much. We received from one publisher 50 pages of ISBN numbers with 50 single lines each to just buy the core set of materials in a K-5 curriculum. That's a lot. So, as we're gonna spend about 5 minutes before lunch going into a reflection from the morning, okay? But I wanna let you know, usually what happens when I present, and particularly take this amount of time to get through, you're already on our website looking if what you've purchased for your educators is aligned. By the way, I never get offended by that. If I'm not entertaining enough, knock yourself out. And by the way, again, we won if you're already on the website looking at evidence and going, oh, did it make it? And then you're like, why didn't it make it? That's the kind of healthy discussion we are excited for you to have. And we are pleased that some of the most talented educators across the United States, including Wisconsin, can contribute to your discussion, okay? So I know you're there. One of your first questions you should think about is what you purchased. Is it even used, right? We asked you that in the first one. We're gonna come back and lunch and think about that. But I want you to know you're not alone. So the Center for American Progress recently looked at what the 30 largest districts in the United States are using, and they looked at our reviews, and they looked at Louisiana, which for a state adoption process has a tremendously high bar, and they use a version of Student Achievement Partners IMED. Also a great resource, multiple tools to give you evidence and to support your discussions about what to choose. And ultimately only 2 of those districts, only 2, were using all standards aligned material. And by the way, it was almost impossible to find out what people were using from a website, which is something I've lived as a parent as well. It's super hard to even understand what's in use. So what I'd like you to do now, and I'm gonna call you back before you are charged with lunch, is to just take 5 minutes. I promise I'll complete us back at 12 and 30 seconds. So just take 5 minutes to go into your protocol. Okay, your guide, I think we are on, sorry to step out of the box. There's a box here, guys. Oh no, oh, no. Yes, it is on page 12. Do not turn and talk to your neighbor. You can do that at lunch. And just write down a few reflections, okay? And don't just think about what I've talked about. Think about Kate, think about what Sheila started us with. What have you learned today thus far? And what's, again, going around your head about things you need to do? Because when we come back from lunch, we're going to talk about some steps around adapting and adopting after. Okay? So take 5 minutes. Great. Thank you for taking the time to reflect a little bit before lunch. I hope you're smelling good smells from any lunch coming in. I am a big believer in exit tickets, and I hope as you reflected from the morning about the importance of what we're all trying to accomplish here today and the time you're devoting to this, that we need more. We need more people, we need more districts, we need more educators and more followers. So before you go to lunch, for those of you who are social media inclined, I wanted to remind you what the hashtag is. I even gave you a prompt. By the way, real quote from real teacher, but not from Wisconsin, okay? And just take a second to talk about anything you learned from these reflections to share with your colleagues and others. If you are less social media inclined, here's your exit ticket. Write a question for Kate and I, because if not, you're gonna spend a half hour of us answering whatever we want to. I think you've already seen where Kate's going. I might surprise you. We might have to sing and dance. We are in Waukesha, and I'm a fan of the Bodine, so I can go into some Bodine songs. But aside from that, hopefully you are writing some questions, because there still might be a lot of things unanswered. Please enjoy your lunch, and when you come back, we're gonna talk about the materials you have and what do you do next and how we might be able to engage educators in it, and enjoy your lunch.